Building Science 101 is sponsored by Anderson Windows and Doors, Builders FirstSource, Huber Engineered Woods, Polyguard, Sashco, and ViewRail.
All right, my friends, Building Science 101. Let's get going. Episode 1, why do we build?
Yeah, what a question, huh? That is a loaded question. You know, when I set out to set up this series with you and talk about, well, what are we going to talk about? What should that first episode be? How do we open it? I thought it was probably most important that we go right to square one.
Yeah.
Right? We can't talk effectively about building unless we talk about why.
That's right.
What are we providing the solution to?
Mm-hmm.
Why do we build? Now, if I had 100 builders and homeowners in the crowd and I asked them, polled them, said, hey, why do we build? Oh, I want a house. I need to be in a house. I like it because it's warm in there. I want to get out of the rain. I need a place to store all my stuff. Like, we'd get 100 answers, but I doubt we'd get the real answer.
So what is the real answer,
So
Steve?
the real answer, right? When we think about building, what are we really trying to do? And I always explain it as, we simply don't want to be out there.
Mm-hmm.
We want to be in here.
Yep.
So what does that mean? Well, in some places it means different things than in other places. For example, in Austin this afternoon at 2 o'clock, we don't want to be out there
No, it's 100 degrees.
because it'll be 100 degrees. We want to be in here because it's 70 degrees.
Yep.
Chances are there's probably higher than comfortable humidity out there.
Yep.
And we don't want to be out there because of that. We want to be in here where it's cooler and the humidity is a little lower. Now, if I was in International Falls, Minnesota in December or January, I don't want to be out there because it's freezing.
So I might actually die.
And I picked International Falls because it is like one of the coldest places in the U.S. And yeah, so you want to be inside. But again, what does that mean? You can't just say, well, I want to be inside. Okay, I want to be inside. But what that really means is I want to come into a conditioned space.
Mm-hmm.
I want to come into a space that can be predicted.
Yep.
Right? So the minute you say, well, I want to be able to predict something, well, now you're invoking science.
Yeah.
Right? And because this is tied to building efforts, hence the name,
Building Science.
Building Science.
That's right.
Right? So we build to basically put an environment inside the larger environment that we live in.
Yeah, for sure. You know, my friend Christoph Irwin uses an example where he says, you know, our houses are a little like fish bowls, where that goldfish is swimming around in the fish bowl, and the glass separates the goldfish from, lack of water, which would be death for that fish. But ultimately, it's an enclosure, and the fish swims around in that enclosure. What do you think about that analogy?
Yeah, I mean, it's perfect. It's an environment inside a larger environment that provides a solution for its inhabitant. In that case, it's a fish.
Yeah.
But, I have this sketch here that it's funny you bring up that story because in this sketch, it's a small section of a real simple structure, but it could very easily be a fishbowl.
Yeah, that's right.
Right. And if I draw myself in here and, even though I have Big Red,
This is the iPad version.
this is the iPad version of Big Red. But when we draw a person in there, we're basically suggesting that I want to be somewhere inside this building science polygon.
Yeah.
Right? When it's 90 out here, I want it to be 70 in here.
Mm-hmm.
When it's 0 out here, I want it to be 70 in here.
Yep.
I want that humidity. When it's pouring rain, I don't want to be wet.
Yeah.
Right? And the minute we invoke that idea of building science, well, we can't just simply draw a simple red line. We basically have to develop assemblies that can solve that problem for us.
Yeah, you're basically developing conditioned space, right? And I'm stealing this from you, but I've heard you say we're looking for control of our environment, right?
Yeah, the whole thing. So if we went back to your original question, hey, Steve, why do we build? I would say because we want to gain control,
Mm-hmm.
right? And when gaining control just doesn't mean, hey, it's warm in here. We want to be able to, say, build machinery and equipment that can solve and make sure that it's 70 degrees and 50% or 45% RH
Right.
in there every day, every minute of the day.
Yeah.
And oh, guess what? If I take a walk up the stairs and I go to my kid's bedroom, I don't want it to be 80 degrees up there,
That's right.
right?
Because otherwise we could live in a tent and be dry, let's say, but we wouldn't be able to actually gain control of the rest of the environment around us. So we're using science to help us gain control of everything around us, not just that rain, not just that basic shelter or safety from animals or robbers. We've got everything under control in our environment.
But I mean, all of that certainly plays a role in it. We certainly want some structural integrity. We like the security and safety features, which are also side effects or anecdotal notions of why we build also. But ultimately, it's because we want control. I have a funny story. When I was younger, we used to go to my aunt's house, and she had this cape. It was definitely not insulated. And like every night in the summertime, my dad'd say, "Hey, let's go to bed." And I would like give him a hard time about, "I want to go upstairs. It's hot up there. It's like an oven."
Yeah.
And he'd like smack me and just say, "It's summertime, kid. It's supposed to be hot, right?" But the reality is that even though air conditioning, it's been around since something like 1928, late 20s, we really haven't put it in effect until the post-World War II era.
Yeah.
When everybody came back and there was this giant building boom, air conditioning went into the more expensive houses. But now, I mean, I don't care where you build in the United States, you're probably putting air conditioning in. Even International Falls, Minnesota,
That's crazy,
we're
isn't it?
still putting air conditioning up there and heating.
When I grew up in the 70s and when I grew up in the 80s, I should say, in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, my house didn't have any central air conditioning. We just had central heat. And even though I was in a more mild climate, potentially, or a slightly more southern exposure than you up in Boston growing up or Massachusetts, we had no AC. My parents had a window rattler in their master bedroom, but the rest of the house was whatever it was with the windows open at night. Now, one benefit of the north in some areas is that we have cooler nighttime temperatures, whereas Texas, there's months will go by where it's never below 70 degrees even at night. So we can't just throw our windows open in July in Texas and cool the house down like we could some nights growing up in Pennsylvania. But when I was in high school, probably in the late 80s, 89, 90, my parents got central air conditioning at our house in Pennsylvania. And it's funny, ever since then, we've all seen our cars go from having one slide dial from heat to cold, and that's all you had to condition your car, to these days, even my Chevy pickup truck has, my side is 68 degrees and my wife's side is 74 degrees. Do you really think it's that much difference between the two? But it's that perception of, I can really dial in the control for my environment.
Yeah, and that's what the car people are selling, right? They're not selling what can you do, they're selling why do you want to do it.
Yeah.
Like when I jump in that passenger seat, I want to at least get in my mind that I am turning this up to 72. My side's cooler than your side because I just want it a little cooler. But it's that perception. And the same thing with houses is that you go in and you want, obviously it's real. It's not quite a perception because you walk in there, it's 70. But when you take places like Phoenix or Austin, say in July or August, like you really can't survive outside during the day. I mean, people do. There's guys out there roofing and stuff, which is just baffling to me. But, they do it because they have to do work, but it's never really a choice.
Yeah.
Like, hey, let me just go sit out in the sun and bake.
That's right.
All afternoon. It's let me go inside and, put on the TV in my nice controlled environment.
That's so fascinating that you mentioned that. 60 to 70 years really of really being able to condition our spaces. Because if you think about the population in North America, mainly population bases were in the northern states, where it was a little more mild in the summertime, certainly cold in the winter, and we've had more ability to heat than air condition. Let's say 100 years ago, we had fireplaces and fires. But if you look at the population growth in the South in particular, Phoenix is super booming. I'd say Phoenix is on fire, both literally and figuratively. It's super hot in Phoenix, and yet the population there has grown greatly because, you're right, we've only had really this ability to space condition, to air condition in the last 50, 60 years. Same with Texas. It's a hugely growing state. And a big reason for that is that we can air condition our offices and our houses so that, even in extreme heat, we can be in the 70-degree range, which is very comfortable for us.
And I think, historically, when you look at how the country developed, where people lived, how equipment developed, right? AC was after heating systems, right? We had coal stoves and stuff that my parents grew up with in their houses. So when people talk about control or conditioning, a lot of times the perspective is such that it's tied to heating environments, right? And comfort is tied to heating environments.
Yep.
But like you just said, probably the highest populated areas in the last decade are Florida, Texas, and Arizona.
Yeah.
Undoubtedly.
Massive.
Right?
Massive change in population.
So the perspective is slightly changing. And when we talk about control, it's not, hey, how do I make this house nice and warm and energy efficient?
Yep.
It's, how do I make this house nice and cool?
Yeah.
But the understanding is, in both cases, I'm purchasing raw energy somewhere.
That's right.
And I have to convert that energy and either make cooling or make heating to condition that environment. But both of them are tied to this idea of control and predicted control.
Yep.
And what I find really interesting in my short time of 30 years in the industry, if you were to graph, say, the start of our ability to create good equipment and assemblies, right? It's on a nice path upward.
Yep.
Like we can build better walls now than we could build in the 50s. We have better insulation techniques. We also have better equipment.
Yep.
Right? But with that comes a much higher expectation.
Boy, that's for sure. Expectations have definitely risen from my childhood of, it'll be between 60 degrees and 90 degrees in my bedroom when I go to bed at night. And depending on that, I'll either go to bed in my underwear on top of my sheets or I'll put a huge blanket on. Whereas today we have those dials on the car. I mean, ultimately, Steve, if we could summarize this episode 1, you've heard Steve and I use the word a bunch, control. That's ultimately what we're looking for. And in this series, as we step out the other 9 episodes, this Building Science 101 series is kind of like a ladder. It's a stair step. Step 1 is control. Steve and I have 9 more episodes for you. Stay tuned, guys. Any other summary that I missed? Steve?
No, I mean, we're going to be on a really interesting journey here because, we talk about, you highlight the word control. Every choice, I'm sitting here trying to think, is there a choice I make about building or as an architect that doesn't fall back to the baseline of control?
Yeah.
And it's probably not. Everything that we put into our houses, everything that we choose to operate inside our houses, everything we bring in after we build the building has some level of tie back to the word control.
That's right. This episode of Build Science 101 brought to you by our friends at Andersen Windows. This is a long-standing brand, Steve. They've been around for many, many decades. And the A-series window they're making now is currently the most efficient, highest performing window that Andersen's ever offered.
30 years in the industry, Andersen, I remember my very first project I ever did, it had Andersen windows.
Is that right?
Yeah. So it's nice that we have a company here that is now developing their performance even further. It's great to have a domestic manufacturer that is developing their line of triple glazed windows and offering that option here.
And even if FIA certified, right? Meaning they've got really high standards for air tightness, for water holdout. This is really a top performing window.
And you still get that beauty and elegance of a really nice aesthetic, the muttons and all of that wrapped into that performance. And when you're talking about windows, and if we bring it back to the building science level, understand that windows are everything in our control layer, right? There are water management, air management, thermal comfort, everything is wrapped up in there. And so window manufacturers are really tasked with probably the hardest job in building.
Yeah, I mean, you're punching a hole in that perfect envelope that you made that's insulated, that's structurally sound, and now we got to pop a hole in it. and make sure that that window can control all of that. So this is a tough task.
And these guys do it exceptionally well, because not only do they solve the building science part, but they make it look great.
Yeah, for sure. Last thing I want to mention, Steve, is they make windows that you can specify as PG 70 rated. Now we don't have time to get into what the PG stands for and what this testing looks like, but the quick and dirty is they test windows, every manufacturer does, with this independent testing service where they put wind and water up against these windows to simulate all kinds of terrible weather. And the higher the rating, the more that window is able to withstand the wind and the water from making it through the window. And a PG 50 rating is already a very high rating. When you go to coastal applications, you need to go to that PG 70 rating. And sometimes in the coastal regions, like if you're building in Florida, you're adding impact resistant glass as well. But they can do it without the impact glass, but still the PG 70 rating, which that's a great optional upgrade. That means that that window is really gonna seal tight. It's not gonna leak air. It's not gonna have water coming through that window. And that's good for every region of the country. I was in a house the other day that was in a dusty area, and because the wind was blowing, dust was coming right through those windows and piling up on the windowsills. So now, if we talk about a window that's PG 70 rated, we're not gonna have those problems.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I mean, their balance of performance and aesthetics is as good as it gets.
For more information, you can go check these guys out on the web at andersonwindows.com. And big thanks to Anderson for sponsoring the Build Science 101 series. Let's wrap it up, guys. Thank you for joining us. Episode 1, Why Do We Build? Stay tuned for episode 2. Otherwise, we'll see you next time on The Build Show.